your assumption is just so wrong. And assumptions, like we said earlier, move the world forward. We would not be able to do what we do. And the fight or flight thing, like, we're descended from people that had to know when to run or stay. If there was a threat, to run or stay, fight or flight. And we're descended from people that survived. Well, most of them probably assumed a threat was worth paying attention to, at least, if not running from. And so we immediately see the prospect of threat, and we are programmed, because we're descended from those people, to listen to that.
Yeah.
And so we are fighting that, and we need to listen to it and say, like, okay, my gut says something's not wrong here, and you should listen to that. However, you should also pay attention and not assume your gut is right. But go, my gut says this, I'm going to watch. And you watch and watch and watch and watch and watch until 3 hours later in your course, you're like, hey, my gut was totally wrong.
Yeah.
And this guy is someone I would love to
spend time with,
like hang out with, socialize with, work with, partner with, have on the podcast. It's just crazy.
Crazy. And, you're extremely insightful. And
I did not come up with that, by the way. I have listened to other people talk about that.
Well, and the reason I say that is because I've been listening to this information in the past few weeks about judgment, and one of the things that's identified in this book by the humble poet is our origins and what our brains have patterned around. And they patterned around, in the beginning, a very small community where you had to gain acceptance, approval, or you wouldn't survive.
Right.
Because if you didn't provide and, get approval for doing what the small group needed, you were out.
Yeah.
You were out.
Yeah. And your brain is looking for snakes in the grass. I mean, you're looking for people in society, and that's whenever society has gotten out of control, Nazis, stuff like Mao China, like these like terrible situations that have happened. What's happened is snakes in the grass have gone without being put back in their place and said, like, no, you will not be a part of society. And it's when we all go along with a terrible idea. And we need to constantly be looking for snakes in the grass to weed out and say, like, you are terrible. Get out of here. We need judgment. Judgment is incredibly valuable to make, to draw lines in the sand of what behavior is okay and what behavior is not.
Right.
And we need to be capable of dealing with that and saying, absolutely not. You are not going to speak to that person like that. And we need to do it in our own hearts and say, like, you're not going to talk to your spouse like that. You're not going to treat yourself like that. The descendant conversation is really interesting because there's a lot of things that, we have descended from, like the public speaking nerves. They talk about how that is because if you spoke in public in a small tribal society, you are probably defending your life, and you are probably making a case for why you're not a snake in the grass, or why you should be allowed to live, or why we shouldn't go fight that other tribe because we're all going to die, and there's twice as many of them. And so these things that are all programmed into us are incredibly valuable, but we don't live in a tribal society anymore. We live in a modern, sophisticated society where there's probably going to be food on my table next week. There's probably going to be oil in my oil tanks. There's probably going to be hot water, drinkable water. And so we need to use our gut, which is incredibly valuable, but also put it aside. And when Elon Musk talked about, in something I was listening to him talk about, he said, don't follow cynics and pessimists. Their belief systems are self-fulfilling. Don't follow cynics and pessimists. Their belief systems are self-fulfilling. And he said, I'd rather be an optimist and be wrong than a pessimist and be right.
Amen.
And so I think, like, integrating